I want to walk you through the first 100 days of learning Salesforce development, and this is the roadmap that I created. You see here there are four main blocks: the basics, the control structures, the data structures, and the beginner topics that are specific to Salesforce. So one of the most important topics are these basic topics. And this is something that people quite often neglect, which they absolutely shouldn't. And as you see, there's no triggers, for example. There's no asynchronous apex in this map. The reason for that is because it is not a beginner topic. It doesn't have anything to do with learning how to code. It's much more about the Salesforce specific Salesforce topics. So the first big block when you start, I would say in the first month, should be focused on very, very fundamental concepts. Without these concepts, you wouldn't be able to understand all the other stuff. And this map, it's structured like a path because without covering the first topics, you won't really understand very well the remaining topics. So for example, here in the OP, which is object-oriented programming, you see all these boxes, but actually from these boxes, the most important are objects, classes, methods, and you can also argue and add here, instead of objects, also as object, Salesforce objects. The least important topics here are inheritance and interfaces, something that you should be aware of, but most likely you won't be using it in your first year or maybe two working as a Salesforce developer. Also here included some kind of variables or basic syntax that you would need to understand how to structure a variable in Salesforce and where to actually write it, for example, in developer console, or now there's code builder that you can use. And my map for some reason is trying to reconnect. Don't know why. Doesn't matter. So then once you have those basics, those very, very basics, you can go and try to add the next step, which would be control structures. And the whole idea behind control structures is that they allow you to add different branches of execution into your code. So if else, for example, allows you to have two different outcomes, or maybe 3-4 different outcomes, depending on what data do you have in your code. These are very easy topics, so I think the whole control structures in Apex you can learn within a week. But then there's much more important control structure, which is called loops. Now the problem with loops is that loops are very, very connected to data structures, because the whole idea behind the loop that you go over some kind of data, you iterate through some kind of collection. And without having the collection, which is list, set, or map, it's very hard to have something. Okay, here we go, the board is finally loaded. Now with data structures, lists and sets are quite easy, and maps are a little bit more complicated. In itself, a map is a really easy data structure, so there's nothing super difficult about how a map behaves, but the application of maps is a little bit difficult, because maps, they are usually applied and used in triggers. For example, for capturing a state of a record. Once you're done with those basic topics, you can go and try to learn something that is more Salesforce specific, like for example, SOQL queries. Most likely you already have some kind of idea behind SOQL queries, or you can even write some really good SOQL queries. Now the question is also, if you can write SOQL queries, how can you take those SOQL queries and run them in Apex? How can you take something out of the database, perform some kind of actions, and update in the database? It should not take you more than, let's say, 2-3 weeks to learn. Then the next topic would be the DML, data manipulation language. I have a separate video about that, so you can watch about that, but that would be also quite an easy topic. What is much more difficult to learn are tests and exceptions and metadata and all of that. So those topics, they are not that important. I would say that these are the last topics that you should learn, but they're still important for your general development journey and understanding how the code is written for real world. For example, tests, they're essential. You can't write any code without writing tests, but as a beginner, tests, they should not be your focus. You should rather focus on building something, not writing tests. And the best practices, also don't overemphasize on the best practices. Read about the best practices, think about best practices, but don't put too much time on it, because your goal is to progress as quick as possible, which means to go over these topics as quick as possible and to go into topics where you can actually build something. Okay, that's it for today. See you in the next one.